we wanted to start today, as we're going to have this conversation over the next 45 minutes or so, about multidisciplinary responses to labor trafficking. Once an individual victim has been identified, what does it look like to respond? So we're going to be really kind of getting down to brass tacks here, if that's the phrase, of the how to, the what, the who, the why we need to do this. So, and we'll talk a little bit about the challenges. So, in order to have this conversation, we wanted to just spend a few minutes at the beginning piecing together what is labor trafficking. So, anyone here in the room, what is labor trafficking? I'll take one in-person response and then one or two in-person responses, and if anyone online wants to add something in, if you're there, I don't see anything, but if you're there, if you want to add something into the chat, please feel free to do that too. So, somebody want to volunteer? Thinking about all that we've learned today or what you knew coming into the room. What do we mean by labor trafficking? We all came here for some reason, wanting to either learn about labor trafficking or because you're working with individuals experiencing labor trafficking. So what is it?
In your own words, whatever you
in your own words.
Learn about it.
It doesn't need to be 22 USC 7102. Yes, Jane, thank you.
So by definition, I believe it is forced labor for little or no pay. Isolation is usually a big part of it. That's it.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Anybody want to add something? Thank you, Jane. Applause for Jane. Woo! Anybody want to add something about what labor trafficking looks like or what it is? I'm sorry, I just keep looking at the Department of Labor. You're like right in front of me. Yes, go ahead.
Being coerced into working or feeling like you don't have a choice into taking a job, and then maybe your documents are taken away, you are forced to live there, work overtime, and not get paid for that, etc.
Awesome. Okay, that is super helpful. So anyone online in the chat or want to unmute and add anything about what labor trafficking is, what it looks like? Trying to pull in our online people here. I'm just hoping a voice is gonna come from somewhere with someone saying something. No? If anyone wants to jump in, we can see you on the chat, or go ahead and put a hand up and we'll get to you. Okay, so in the meantime, let's, I want to just spend just 2 or 3 minutes here. That is great. I think we have a pretty good understanding. We talked a lot already about sex and labor trafficking, both being forms of human trafficking that overlap. So this is really what I wanted to put up here, that we've been wrestling with here in Minnesota, is understanding kind of labor exploitation, labor trafficking. What is actually happening to victims and survivors who are experiencing labor trafficking or labor exploitation? So as we talked about with the 2 responses here, we're often seeing labor trafficking having elements of force or coercion, people feeling that they don't have a choice about working, doing some type of work or services. Now, we also have labor exploitation, which our Department of Labor folks could tell us a lot more about. That is all kinds of exploitative work circumstances where the laws, labor laws, are not being followed and people are being taken advantage of in different ways. But it's not the same as labor trafficking. Now, I put around the outside some of the things that we're seeing popping up a lot as we're exploring. You know, you heard about today that there is a bill in the legislature to create funding for labor trafficking services. There also is a bill that is soon to be signed, or maybe has been signed already, that amends our definition of labor trafficking in state law to make it clearer, easier to prosecute. So great things happening. We are also developing new responses in the child welfare system and trying to enhance our services through Safe Harbor. So some of the things that we're seeing kind of popping up where there's intersections, just wanted to point out really briefly that we're seeing a lot of discussion around forced criminality, both in the intersection between sex and labor trafficking, and even apart from that. Gil Marie mentioned that a little bit this morning with seeing kids having to do all kinds of different things, drug running or different things like that. That would be forced criminality. We're also seeing a lot of discussion around family businesses. What does intrafamilial trafficking look like? What does it look like to be trafficked in the context of your family's business? Some questions. And then some common themes that we're seeing is intersection with child labor laws. Think about the big, some of the big cases that we've seen happen recently here in Minnesota. Across many different industries. So this is a slide that maybe some of you have seen before, but just to highlight again, we mentioned briefly this morning, kind of the range of industries that people can be trafficked in. So those illegal types of services, those transient services, services where there's a middle person, that'd be fisher, or any type of job where you can be isolated or invisible, where people don't often see you doing your work. So I wanted to just highlight last thing before we get to our panel to set our context here. You know, we've had a couple of cases here in Minnesota. So just to set our baseline here for some of the conversation around challenges and around how to do this work. We're in many ways at the beginning of this work. And so there, I put up this little screenshot of Hennepin County's first labor trafficking case that was in 2019. Many of you also may have heard of the recent news reports about the large slaughterhouse in Worthington, Minnesota that had many children under the age of 18 working there, and some questions around whether labor trafficking was occurring. In both of those situations, I think lots of complexity about what was the multidisciplinary response? Was there one? What did the collaboration look like? How can we, at these beginning stages, plan for a more effective, more collaborative response to really meet the needs of victims and survivors? So that's the brief context that the panel wanted me to provide. As we get started, hearing from each of them about their work, their intersection with this topic. And we're actually going to start that right now with some introductions here. So again, I'm going to have each of you introduce briefly, name and role, also your connection with this topic, multidisciplinary response to labor trafficking, and then any opening comment you want to make to frame the discussion that we'll have. So I'm just going to pass it down here.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Caroline Palmer, and I'm the Safe Harbor Director at the Minnesota Department of Health. I think most people here know what Safe Harbor is, but I'm just going to give a very brief overview. Safe Harbor is our statewide response to human trafficking and exploitation. Over the years, we've really focused on exploitation, sexual exploitation of youth under the age of 24. In recent years, through federal funding, and now we're starting to see this in state funding, we're expanding to responding to labor trafficking and labor exploitation too. So again, we are basically the Department of Health. When Safe Harbor was first put into place about over a decade now, we really wanted to have a public health response informing how we go about looking at trafficking and exploitation in our state. But we also are very much a multidisciplinary response. We partner with the Department of Human Services, with Sarah over in the child welfare response. We partner with the Office of Economic Opportunity on the shelter and housing response. We partner with the Office of Justice Programs and the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and the Department of Public Safety. So we look at the law enforcement response, the investigative response. We're partnering more with the Attorney General's office now on prosecutions. I mean, it really goes across. So I think that's part of the reason why I'm here today is Safe Harbor is a multidisciplinary response. It's always been planned out that way. And through all of our grantees that we have across the state, some of whom are here in the room today, we all come together to respond in ways that are based on our expertise and roles. And I think that's what makes our system really strong. So I'm going to pass it over to Bobby Jo.
Thank you. And my name is Bobby Jo Pasternak. I'm the special agent in charge of the predatory crime section at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And for those of you that don't know what the Minnesota BCA is, for short, it is our statewide criminal investigative agency. The section that I supervise, agents and civilians, is the predatory crime section. So the agents investigate human trafficking, both sex and labor, internet crimes against children, and non-compliant predatory offenders. My role in human trafficking began back in 2017. First, I have to tell you, Bella, you said you had a 30-year mark a couple of weeks ago. Well, in a couple of weeks, I have my 30 years of full-time law enforcement. Yeah. So, it's been a long haul, but back in 2017, I was asked to step up and create a statewide human trafficking investigative task force, which I did. At that time, labor trafficking really didn't have any role in that creation because it was funded specifically for sex trafficking. But as we started building this task force out, we quickly identified the huge gap of labor trafficking not being identified, not getting any attention in Minnesota and honestly around the country. And so it became very important as part of our task force and a mission for myself and for my state collaborative partners to start bringing this attention to the state of Minnesota. And so my comment for all of you in moving forward in today is, first of all, I applaud all of you for being here because that is a challenge for us right now to get Minnesota to wake up and realize that this is a heinous crime. And I'm going to get passionate right now, and those of you that have seen me present before know that I do this because it angers me when people talk about human trafficking synonymously with sex trafficking. There are two parts of human trafficking, and it is sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And I need you to hear it from me in addition to these fine folks that we're here with, because I am overseeing and supervising these crimes that are being investigated. And these predators that prey on the vulnerabilities of our Minnesotans are by far controlling more violently, physically, and mentally. And it is happening all across our state.
Thank you. So you already know my name, Ronnie Mori. But the reason why I'm really part of this is because, as they were mentioning, just a gap about more information on human trafficking, on labor trafficking, and how we're gonna have like effective first responder if they are not trained properly on labor trafficking. So yeah, they can respond to a situation with sex trafficking, but what about with labor trafficking? And that is what I'm here, and that's what I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna be pushing my voice forward until I've been heard by everyone and changes have been made. And I know changes have been made already, but we need to keep working on that. And that's my reason why I'm here. And as she's so passionate about it, I am too. So labor trafficking is something that is in my heart, in my soul, and I will advocate for that my whole life.
I feel like you all spoke a lot. So my name is Bella, and I spoke to you previously about why I'm here. I'm just passionate about making change.
All right, so we have 3 questions that I'll pose to our panelists. Then we're going to take a pause and answer questions that you all have, and then we'll come back and do one last big question about some of the challenges and opportunities. So just so you know what's going to happen. So the first question is for all of you, any of you who want to answer. Why is collaboration important in the response after a survivor of labor trafficking is identified? If you can give an example from your experience, either in practice or in protocol or policy, that would be great. So here we're getting to the why. Who wants to start?
So collaboration is important after, before, during, across the board. If we don't have a collaboration in place to even start when we're developing protocols to figure out how we're even going to respond to these cases, we're all going to be kind of running around not knowing which way to go and who to talk to. So first off, we need to create protocol so we're all prepared and ready, and that includes law enforcement, prosecution, healthcare, social services, child welfare. I mean, everybody who's responding has to be at the table. So when a survivor is identified, that protocol can go into place and it can start happening. And that means if Bobby Joe is getting the call, Bobby Joe knows who to contact within social services, with a regional navigator, within the healthcare, where are they taking somebody immediately if they need healthcare treatment? When does the prosecutor get involved? When is child welfare getting called? Or if child welfare is the one that starts it off, where does that go down the line? It can go in so many different directions. For the victim survivor, this means that they're not having to maybe tell their story over and over again, their experience over and over again. This means that they get directly to the impacted help that they need at that moment, and it could be their basic needs. It could be getting them to a safe place. It could be getting them food, clothing, hotel, whatever it is. Then they are in a better position to be able to work with other parts of the system. And so this just means that everybody is not stepping on each other's toes, that they're respecting each other's roles. And when our hope is, when it works well, is that things work fairly smoothly. And so the survivor is getting warm handoffs. They're not kind of lost, wondering about what's going to happen next. And so we know also that once somebody has been identified, it's a long experience for them. If the case is going to be investigated, if they are going to get services, if there is going to be a prosecution, they're in this for the long haul. This could be several years. And so all of these initial relationships that are created within a collaboration mean that that person feels like they've got a team of people that they know and a team of organizations working with them and responding to them. So I think not only for the system to be able to work smoothly, but also for the victim survivor to feel like they have trust and support and can continue to work with that system, having this collaboration is so important.
Well said, Caroline. There's not a whole lot that I need to add to that. However, understanding that, for me, from my perspective, an investigation, that is such a complex investigation because these traffickers are savvy, right? And the communities and law enforcement are not identifying that these are trafficking situations. So it takes an army for us to attack this issue in our state, which means all systems need to be working together and being respectful of one another. And I was asked for an example, and unfortunately I have so many examples of how our systems have failed people that were in need of assistance, and I'll just give you a very brief, short example. So as we were working on a protocol, and as we were trying to bring awareness to our state, I got a phone call from a local law enforcement agency who had been called down to a hospital, right? So great, somebody identified there was something more than just, and I don't mean to take away from an assault, but it was more than just that one thing, just an assault. There was something else going on. They called the local agency. The local agency recognized, oh, I have no idea what this is, but I know who to call. So my phone rings, and I said, oh, I'll be right down, okay? When you are having a multidisciplinary response, you have to think of a lot of different things. The investigation comes second to taking care of the immediate short-term needs, basic needs of the individual. That was my number one goal. This individual was still in that trafficking situation. I needed to figure out who can I get to help her to get her safe, number one, and get her basic needs. And then long-term, who's going to be by her side for the long term? Because as we talked about, historical trauma doesn't cure itself overnight, right? We need all these support systems working together. I started calling, and trust me, I have a lot of connections in this state. I started calling every single connection I had, and it was, sorry, I've got nothing. Sorry, she's too old. We talk about the age of 24. Sorry, She's not a domestic violence victim. I'm sitting there going, what am I can't bring this lady home with me as much as I would love to, but I also can't keep her in a situation that is unsafe. That's why we need all of these systems to work together, and that's why we have been fighting so hard over the last 3 years to bring awareness, to change laws, and to find services, find money that will help labor trafficking victims.
Thank you, well said. And it's right. You know, the well-being of the human being is the one priority when we know there is a case of human trafficking. So, in knowing what to do, how to respond, and they were saying, you know, the right connection, because there are a lot of people in the movement saying, in organizations saying that they are providing services. I'll allow you an example, because, you know, when you try to reach out for help, and there are organizations who are getting money from the state, and they are just saying that they are doing something, they are not doing that. And Bukola can testify about an example, someone who needed help at a point, and Bukola has to go in and like make an appointment to someone, or we'll provide the kind of service for that person. And it took Bukola to speak to someone else about that person and then respond to that. Sometimes the response will be about life or death. I mean, in certain situations, because every case is different. But what I mean is, if we're the first responder, I mean, if we're saying that we're doing something like providing services for that one a victim is identified, that we're doing that we're actually doing it. It's not just saying that when we call and we call for resources, that we know who to call and get help for that person. That's the first thing, to get that person in the same place, that feel comfortable, and after that, of course, the investigation is coming out after that. But the well-being of the individual is the main thing. So collaboration is the key. Collaboration with the right responders, with people that are really working on it, people that really care about it, and there is money. I don't know about in the state of Minnesota, but federally, there's money. They just need to allocate the proper amount of money to work on labor trafficking.
Thank you, Honorable Ronnie. Agent Bobby Joe, I think you mentioned as well the importance of making sure that we're all on the same page. And I'm sure from an agent perspective, you would agree, or maybe not, that the clock starts before a victim is identified. You know, I remember my trafficking situation was in Newark, New Jersey, and in courtroom, they showed us a video of they've been investigating, and then we saw ourselves little and we were aging. But the agent that was in that video, his name is Joe, and I work with Joe now. Love Joe. He's been doing this, he's retired now. But one thing he said was before they got to us, they had a social worker, they had a team of people that were going to carry out the rescue, they call it. They had a social worker. They had a board for us to identify who is from what, to have a language support. They had the states that we could go to help. So this is Newark, New Jersey. Then once we were identified, they determined, okay, this subset of you are going to this state. This subset of you are going here, based on your ages and whatnot. And so I didn't realize this until years later, talking to Joe, that their clock started when we were identified. It wasn't at the date that they were going to do the rescue, it was before we were identified. They had to call the states to say, okay, Michigan can take 4, Minnesota can take 2, Iowa can take 1, based on the services that were available. So diversifying your outreach of interagency collaboration, multidisciplinary collaboration, what is in the best interest of this person that is going to be receiving the services? Is it in your state or is it not? So that's how I got to Michigan. Is because Michigan at the time was the state that I can enter foster care from as a foreign national. And so that was the state that was identified to provide the best care based on the resources maybe the resources in this state are strained, where you cannot take that person home, but everybody's in there to, oh. And so, there are so many systemic tensions that undermines processes for the best viable option for people. We talk a lot about systems, and people make these rules. People can change these rules. Systems don't work themselves, just like computers don't work themselves. It is we that work those systems. So it's important that when we talk about system, we identify who is responsible for what, and what can we do to make sure that we don't use systems as an excuse as to why we can't get things done. And so collaboration is important, again, for many reasons, but for the simple fact that, if we don't collaborate, nothing gets done. For us that, because they collaborated, some people who went to Michigan, some people who stayed in Jersey, listen to this. There were 22 of us. We were all children. The subset of us, it was 7 that were identified to go to Michigan. Our outcomes are completely different than the rest that stay in Jersey. And I think it's largely due to agencies and the people who work at those agencies. The rest, out of that 22 number, the 7 of us who went to Michigan, we are all doing okay. Because we had a community of support. They say, okay, these group of people are coming. This will go to foster care. Churches will take this. Agencies will do this, do this. There are people that are collaborating, and when they run out of resources, they pass us to the next group. And it was almost like you're pushing somebody up, and the next person is taking on. And then in New Jersey, once the first set of services was over for those girls and the boy, that was it. That's all they received. Some of them are in prison now. Some of them, we don't know. Some of them are struggling with mental health. And so it's important to say that it's people who start the system. It's people that's going to change this. So system don't have a face. It has a name, but it doesn't have face. It's people that work in this. So we have to open the box to say, you work here. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. There has to be an answer. A no is not an answer in these situations.
Wow, I feel like we could end the panel on that note. Thank you. So we're going to have another question coming right back to you, Bella and Ronnie. We're going to go to our question number 3 in the interest of time here. So what should be the role of subject matter experts in the field when you are responding to labor trafficking or developing response protocols? What can that role look like? So, do either one of you want to start?
All right, I think our role and is based on all the work that we've been doing in the movement for so many years is really important. So that we bring all the from first-hand experience. We bring our experience, or we also bring the work that we have doing with another victims and survivors of human trafficking. So we have a lot to actually create those protocols and make sure that the principles are being followed properly. And so our role is to keep pushing, but also to show that, as we said before, collaboration is the key. That we can do anything by ourselves. We need everybody's cooperation in that. And as long that we let people know, like the government know, the agencies know, the community know, hey, we're not alone in this. We need people to get involved more. So that will be our role as leaders in this movement, just to bring people together and get a unity that we need to fight human trafficking. Because if we are separated, we are divided, we won't be able to do anything.
Thank you, Honorable Ronnie. The role of survivors as a subject matter expert is important, and for many reasons. If I go to Nigeria and I want to get to a specific village and I don't speak Yoruba, I'll have to find somebody who speaks that language, who have walked that road to guide me to where I'm trying to go. It's the same thing here in the trafficking movement. If you want to solve something, you have to work with people who have experienced that so that they can develop. We provided input to the protocol here. The protocol here, as Honorable Ronnie You're holding it up. You know, we provided input because we know that to eradicate human trafficking, labor trafficking, and sex trafficking, you can't do, no one discipline can do it alone, no one government can do it alone. We need to collaborate. And who better to collaborate with people who know from a first-hand perspective. Same likewise, there are some industry, and Agent Bobby Joe can speak to this, where criminals help support investigation because they can think how criminals think. Same thing. We know how the crime was committed from a back end. We know how we were recruited. How traffickers not only groomed victims, they groom a whole family. They groom a whole society. They are very creative people. I wish they'd do something better with their creativity for humanity. But not only that, but we need to think that in order for us to walk a journey that we've never really walked or understand from a different perspective, we have to work with people who have experienced it. And also survivors. I mean, we mentioned earlier, Honorable Ronnie is a businessman. He's not just a survivor, he's a businessman. There's so many places that we can borrow from to influence protocols and policies. And so it's so important to keep engaging people, not just in labor trafficking, but any industry who have experience that you don't have, to better inform your processes.
Pretty quick, before I forget, I'm sorry that I'm just touching your stuff here, but this is really good. It has all the great information you can find in here about human trafficking, labor trafficking. I mean, all the definitions, signs. I mean, I read this. This is amazing. It was a great work done.
And we will be sending out the link to the protocol as well as a number of other resources after the event today.
I just want to add one more thing. Sometimes survivors also know what services are available to other survivors. There has been times where, you know, I will say, hey, I need this, and then two people will say, oh, hey, this is what I received in this state. So survivor, as subject matter, they are one of the most resourceful people that I know because they either have received it themselves, they know somebody who received it, or they've been a part of a working organization that helped created it. So they have like a boutique to go to resources. So it's not just tell your story or be on a panel and tell us things, but also like what organizations have you worked with? What resources do you have? What resources do you know? How do we collaborate with you to make sure that the next person get what they need?
Yeah, and find the right resources because she was saying, and I'm sorry to take the time for that, but it's important. No, it's important that we know, you know, what resources are available. Even though it's not in your state, but what happened to Bella happening to me in my case too. When my case happened, there was no resources for victims of human trafficking, and I had to get resources from New Orleans, and they had the resources available for me. So I mean, we get connected to one another, but between survivors also, we know so many. We have so many connections, and we can help a lot as well. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay, so one more question here. This one is going to be specifically for Bobby Joe and Caroline to expand a little bit on what you said at the beginning here. This is kind of the how-to. So the question is how you collaborate matters and response protocols can help in defining the scope of collaboration as we talked about earlier ahead of time. So can you just be a little bit more specific in terms of how protocols help guide our collaborative response to labor trafficking and what it looks like to create one? So we heard some about the reason for it, but maybe a little bit more about how to create a protocol.
Thank you, Sarah. So this protocol development was definitely not an easy task. It was a 3-year project. We're in the last of the 3 years, but it was very important to all of us involved. And the most important part about this collaboration was what they've already referred to. And I do need to do a shout out to Bacola and the Enterton story. And I saw that Terry Flaherty was online as well. Those two phenomenal leaders led survivorship groups, and that's who I learned from, and that's who our group learned from. So we could move forward and create something that Ronnie keeps touching and taking from me because he likes it so much. Because of their leadership, this was produced. Had it not been for them, we wouldn't have a product like this. So thank you, first of all, to both of them. And that really is what is important when you're developing protocol, finding the right people to bring to the table. We had struggled, not with Cola and Terry because they're phenomenal, they were easy choices, right? But then we had to go to all the other collaborative systems that we needed, like the medical profession, the law enforcement officers, outside of our task force, who was investigating human trafficking? Patrol officers, what do they know about human trafficking? Attorneys, our civil groups, Minnesota Department of Health and Safe Harbor, and Department of Labor. The Attorney General's office, who had a wage theft group, but nobody was working together on this. So finding those right people to bring to the table. We got them to the table, and then everyone's sitting there going, by the way, why are we here? What is labor trafficking? So then I went, oh, okay, now we need to educate this group. And we brought some phenomenal presenters in, nationally and locally. And we educated our group. And then we had to bring that entire group who has very different perspectives and understandings and beliefs and roles. We had to bring them all together to agree on what this protocol should be. That probably was the most challenging part. We had people on the protocol group that thought that this should be 150 pages. Exactly, thank you. I didn't say it. And then from the law enforcement perspective, which was right, and I will advocate for that to the day I retire. Law enforcement needed something short, concise, especially now with resources so depleted. All they're doing is triaging and trying to get through the day, right? If I would have given them a 150-page document, it would have went in the trash or on the shelf and been a dust collector. What they needed was a one-page document, which we created, that they can easily look at and go, yep, nope, this is who I call. So also knowing the group that you're producing the protocol for and knowing what they need and what's going to work. I was just telling Caroline, I can't remember how many of these I ordered. This is the one page that goes to patrol officers. This is my last pack. Because the last part of our protocol development was the implementation stage, and that's where we're at now. And that's where myself, Bukola, Bella, and other partners, the Advocates for Human Rights, the AG's office, Minnesota Department of Labor, we're traveling around the state and we're educating the law enforcement officers in Minnesota. As many people that we can bring to the table, and I don't care if it's one person that I educate on that day, that's one more person than we had yesterday. The protocol development is something that we all did as an extra collaborative duty, and I will tell you that I would do it all over again, even though I'm currently working 2 full-time jobs. So, as hard as it was, it by far was worth it, and we just hope that we're making a difference in Minnesota.
That was do you have just something quick to add?
Yeah, I would just add, and I think Bobby Jo summed it up really well. It's rewarding, it's messy, you have to find compromise, and you have to be patient. because protocol development and coming together is a 3-year process. If you really want to do it well, even just doing that one pager, that is a lot of work to get that all onto one page. In some ways, that's harder than 150 pages, because what really matters to this group of people is what gets onto that one page. So, I mean, from our perspective at Safe Harbor, we've worked with protocol teams around the state, primarily on sex trafficking, sexual exploitation. We hope to see this expand more on labor trafficking too. It makes a big difference in communities where people can come together and work and figure out where everybody stands, where everybody's ready to go, like you all were saying, before anything even happens. So they are staged and ready. And after this 3-year process, we have a law enforcement piece that is staged and ready for when a case comes up. When somebody does remember, they have that in their packet or in their drawer or in their squad car, whatever. Oh yeah, this looks like a labor trafficking case. Now I've got this, and now I know what to do. So it's so crucial to go through that process.
So are there any questions? We are a little bit short on time, but we could take a couple, and I see one that we're gonna start with. That is here online, and then we could take one in the room too. Let me get Terry's here online. And Terry's question, what are some of your suggestions? This got posted during your answers, Bella and Ronnie, to the second question. What are some of your suggestions on how to encourage, respect, and empower other survivors, maybe in this work, in this process of engaging? And Andrea will come to you.
You got the mic first. What are some of your suggestions on how to encourage, respect, and empower other survivors? I would say survivors are no different than a regular person. We all want to be treated with respect, dignity, love, kindness, regard. And so survivors are not an exclusive group that requires this special treatment. You just treat another survivors how you see them treating themselves sometimes. I tell people, don't treat me how you treat yourself, because I don't know how you treat yourself. You might treat yourself badly. Treat me how you see me treating myself, with kindness, respect, love, and etc. Don't pity people. Survivors don't need your pity. They need your continuous advocacy. They need your choices and the ways that you advocate to reflect what you believe in. If you believe that there should be no exploitation, your actions should reflect that in your day job or not, and just in your community. So I would say advocacy, and then recognize that survivors are not a special group. Don't be impatient and overly critical of people. That includes survivors of trafficking or not. Just people, just regard to people as people.
I would say, congratulations to one another, because to get to this point is hard, it's a lot of work, and we can discourage, all we have been doing in different capacity, just to cheer up one another, I would say, and just think that the work that has been done is not in vain, and there is much more that we can do, and the only way is we can do that if we are together. So,
I was going to also add that I see it on other industries where survivors are preferred based on your educational status. If you're young or old, depending on the type of trafficking, let's not do that. We, hear from people, even if it's people you often don't hear from. Hear from people from Native communities. Hear from diverse group of people, not just in race, but in characteristics. Hear from single parents who are traffickers. Hear from older adults who are traffickers. Hear from people with disabilities. There is a characteristics of certain personality types in the trafficking movement. Because of their grant applications and what they need to do, they will select a specific group of traffickers because they speak to their mission. Let's not do that. That's selective empathy. Either you have empathy or no at all. Don't have selective empathy.
and that's the reason why it's so difficult to create those protocols, because you need to bring to the table. You know, every actors. You know, but the thing is, you know, just to bring the right people to the table to agree, as they said, on this issue, like something that might, Bella say, you know, bring people from different edges. And there are something that apply for me, maybe doesn't apply for you, but we are together and we discuss, okay, if we make that decision that will affect you, oh, I'm here, I want to let that affect me, so this is the way that we should do it. And we get aligned and with a common goal, because we just want to have a world free of slavery.
We got something happening here with the bell. Okay, we're going to come to Andrea here for another question.
Thank you all so much. My question for all of you is, for all of us in the audience, both here in person and online, you know, how do we start this? Where do we land for those resources? How do we start these conversations? Any sort of advice you'd give to us for this call of action? I'd love to hear from each of your perspectives.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Should we stand by now?
Not with me. I believe, you know, and I applaud when people are so humble to understand that I don't know much, you know, and be open to learn from others. Listening, I always been saying about listening, but be humble enough to say, you know, I don't know, I want to learn from you so that you can learn from me as well. So I think that's the key in this case.
Can I borrow Agent Bobby Joe's one-pager thing? No, just sorry. You know, thank you for that question. This is a law enforcement patrol response. So if you're in law enforcement, the first thing is what is labor trafficking, indicators of labor trafficking, situation-specific indicators, initial response protocol. There's just like a to go to here. What industry do you work in?
I'm a Safe Harbor regional navigator, so I help coordinate the response in 11 county region.
Right. So if there is in your job, if there is a coordination, something that's missing, or something that you've already created that isn't working, how do you improve that? If not, what other industries can you borrow from? We don't always have to reinvent the wheel. I'm big for that. If something is working somewhere, it could work here, or you can fix it to work for you. So how do we start? I don't know. You have to figure that out, but I think that you have the ability to figure that out in your specific agency and department.
So my belief is a little bit different than what these fine people have just said. My belief is you leave here and you don't stop talking about it. You stand on top of the table, you shout as loud as you can, you gather everybody that will listen, and you pay this forward. Whatever you have learned and whatever you can take away from today, you can take these and hand them to every single law enforcement officer down there so that they at least have this in their cars and start providing the education to them. We need to spread this word across the state of Minnesota, and we cannot give up. We cannot take no.
And I guess I would just piggyback on that by saying, remind people that Safe Harbor started somewhere too. And 10 plus years ago, people didn't really think sex trafficking was that big of an issue, or it didn't happen in their communities. It was a cities thing, it was an international thing. And now look where it is. You know, and the same thing needs to happen. You know, labor trafficking was left behind at that point, and we have to catch up. And so if somebody's skeptical, just say, look at this system over here, look what we did, look at our response, look what we're doing in the state for this. We need to be doing it over here too.
And if people need examples in your area of what's happening right underneath their nose, I can come and provide some examples. And they probably don't want to hear what I have to say.
Awesome. Well, we are actually at time right now. I want to thank each of you very, very much for all the insights that you shared. Thank you. All right, and I'm going to hand it back over. We will send out, like I mentioned, some links to the resources mentioned today.
Thank you so much. Another round of applause for our panelists, our moderator. Great job. I don't know about you, but if I I feel like there's hope. There's some things that are being done. We've made some progress in the last year, 10 years at least. There's more that's being done, and there's more to be done. So I feel very hopeful, and I hope you did too, from what you just heard. So thanks everyone.